So a really quick update for Harmony Core is we've got our Net 6 work up in a PR. So it'll be in PR phase until we're sort of done with integrating the work back into the templates and the tooling and some like customer projects that we have. So those are the things that we're working on. And if you want to see it, it is in that PR that's up right now on GitHub. So that's pretty much it for Harmony Core at the moment.
Have you had any success with running it on Linux, Jeff?
Oh, well, why, yes, I have. It does, in fact, run on Linux, and the unit tests pass when I run it on Linux. So there is good news there.
All right. Exciting stuff. Anything else? Do you want to do questions on Harmony Core, or let's do questions all at the end, shall we? Okay.
And that works for me.
All right. So let me step in and just give you a quick Synergy update, because there's a lot going on in the Synergy DE world right now. So before we get into what's coming up in new Synergy versions, let's briefly review the status of the current mainstream product. So Synergy 11, as you may already know, we released 11.11i back in November. It was a cross-platform quality improvement release, but it did also add support for 2 new platforms, those being Windows 11 and Windows Server 2022. On that point, if you are a Windows developer or deployer, it's important to note that because of changes in the operating system that affected how Synergy Windows and UI Toolkit input fields get painted, you will almost certainly need to upgrade to 11.11i or to the 12.01.3275 feature release that was just released last week, which also contains the same updated code. So you will almost certainly need to update to one of those 2 versions when deploying those Windows apps on Windows 11 or Windows Server 2022. You know, in the past, it's sometimes been the case that we've said this is the version that supports that new operating system, but you could very often get away with running older versions if you really wanted to. This time, that may not be the case if you're using that kind of screen painting technology. 11.11i is a very stable platform, and we recommend it for use by everybody. Now, turning to the present time, as most of you will know, we're right in the middle of improving the way that we release software by switching to a process that involves 2 types of releases. Those are called feature releases and long-term support releases. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the characteristics of those 2 types of release, because we've done that many times in recent months. If you don't already know about these changes, then what I'd recommend is you head on over to the blog. There's information out there about these types of releases. There's also a very good informational page on the Synergy website. That's I think it's in the menu as deployment strategy or something like that. So go look there. If after doing that you still have questions, then by all means, please feel free to get in touch, and I'll be happy to go over those specific things with you if that's necessary. So where are we in the process? Well, as most of you know, feature releases incrementally introduce the features that will become part of the next LTS release, which will then be supported for a period of at least 4 years. So we released the first feature release that was labeled 12.01.3272 back in September. Even back then, that release included most of the new features and changes of the version 12 release. Then just last week, we released a second and final feature release labeled 12.01.3275. At this point, we are feature complete for everything that we intend to include in the LTS release. So right now is a really great time to test your applications with the new version before the LTS release goes out. But I hear you ask, what is in the new version? Well, as we announced long ago, a couple of years ago now at least, version 12.1, the LTS release that's upcoming, is mainly about supporting .NET 6, or formerly what we knew as .NET Core, as an alternative to .NET Framework in all the places where Synergy and .NET meet. So, for example, all of the statements and routines and classes that we support when using Synergy.NET as a programming language, traditional Synergy APIs like the .NET Assembly API, so driving .NET code from your traditional Synergy app. There's a new XF Netlink.NET client built with .NET Standard, and of course all of the APIs and libraries that are exposed by our product on .NET that can be used in .NET projects through add reference are now available. Add reference in .NET Framework will now be available from NuGet.org for use in .NET 6 applications. The only thing that's really missing from the environment is the ability to create Windows Forms and WPF applications in .NET 6. For a couple of reasons, but we're really not expecting that to be a problem for anybody. We've discussed this with lots of people at this point, and nobody's had a problem with that. Another important feature is TCP/IP licensing for Linux-based systems. This is optional, and if you select it, there will still be a local license server process. But rather than maintaining its own licenses in its LMDB or LMDB64 file, the process communicates with a Windows license server and consumes the same pool of license keys as other Windows and/or Linux systems that are also accessing that same server. By the way, you can only do this when you're using subscription licensing. There are several advantages to network-based licensing on Linux. It simplifies license management for sure, and it enables, for the first time, shared concurrent use licensing across multiple Windows and/or Linux systems. It's also great for development environments, as you can now have one license server, typically on a developer's laptop, and then spin up any number of Windows and/or Linux systems or VMs whenever you want to, and you simply point them all at the license server, and there's no individual licensing to do for any of those. So it considerably simplifies development environments. But the most significant benefit is that it removes a pretty big block that previously prevented Synergy applications from running in containers, for example, in Docker containers, possibly managed within Kubernetes clusters and so on. And this in turn opens up many new possibilities for Synergy applications, including the possibility of deploying Synergy apps to the public cloud. And in a way that's supported by all of the leading cloud vendors, because they all support code running in Docker containers, basically. Another area of change is how we implement encryption on Windows. We no longer use OpenSSL in version 12 on Windows. Instead, we use S-Channel, or the secure channel, which is part of the Windows operating system. So on Windows, you will no longer have to download and deploy OpenSSL DLLs. There are also some other benefits for Windows developers because it's no longer necessary to deal with certificates and CA files on disk. Those certificates can be registered in the Windows Certificate Store where they should be, and there are new mechanisms to reference those certificates directly from the store. For example, when starting XF Server or XF Server Plus. Also, if you're using the HTTP API on Windows, there's a new mechanism that allows certificates from the remote servers that you interact with to be validated against the Windows Store, specifically against the Trusted Root Certification Authorities list, rather than having to export, convert, and provide CA files or certification authorities files with every HTTPS call that you make. So again, just making the environment easier to use, less on-disk files to manage. It's just better. Another related change, and one that's a little more wide-ranging, affects all platforms except OpenVMS at this point. The change means that whenever cryptographic certificates are used to establish secure connections, those certificates will now be validated for authenticity, for revocation, and for expiration. So this didn't happen in almost all cases in previous versions. And also it does mean there's a slight possibility of breaking existing environments, which could feasibly be running with untrusted, revoked, or expired certificates. So we're recommending that if you do use any of these cryptographic certificates to enable encryption anywhere in the Synergy products, you should probably do an audit of the certificates that you use and just make sure they're still trusted and valid. I'm not going to go into a lot more detail about this right now. We've already spoken directly to quite a lot of our customers specifically about this in recent weeks, and we'll continue to do so in the coming weeks. We will also be publishing more detailed information about this change via the Synergex blog in the very near future. So make sure you're signed up to receive blog notifications. One final thing that I want to specifically call out is that there's also a new XFNetlink.net client, which is built with .NET Standard 2.0. This means that this new client can be used both in .NET Framework, .NET Core 3.1, and .NET 6 applications. So the new client comes from NuGet.org, and it is feature compatible with the previous .NET Framework only version, which is still available if you want to carry on installing and getting that DLL the way you always did in Framework applications. One thing that is different is that if you use COM+ pooling with your XFNetlink.net environment, well, that's not available in .NET Core or .NET 6. But have no fear, we've implemented and included a new pooling mechanism that is very similar to the way that connection pooling works in XFNetlink Java. It does require you to write a little bit of pooling code within your .NET application, basically to instantiate and host the pool within your environment. But with that done, the environment is functionally compatible with the COM+ world and supports all of the same pool support methods in your backend environment that the previous environment did. There are also other miscellaneous changes throughout the product set and improvements and bug fixes, of course. So as always, we generally recommend go and review the release notes for the products that you use. They are all available right now via the Resource Center. If you switch to the version 12, if you switch to there's a big button in the Resource Center that says Feature Release Downloads. If you click that button, it'll take you to the downloads for, we default to the version 11 downloads still. That Feature Release button takes you to the version 12 downloads, and you can view the various release notes files right there. Here's a bit of a call to action for you all, but particularly those of you that use Synergy.net or the .NET Assembly API, and for those of you that use any of our encryption technologies. We'd love the Synergy.net developers amongst you to test your code in .NET 6 instead of .NET Framework. We'd love it if any of you out there that use the .NET Assembly API could try to drive, currently you're driving .NET Framework assemblies from your traditional Synergy apps. If you could try and drive .NET 6 versions of those assemblies instead. To do so, there's a new version of GenNet that you would use, and that's available as a .NET Global tool from NuGet as well, and that's all covered in the documentation. We love the XFNetlink.net developers out there to test their apps with the new .NET Standard-based XFNetlink client if you have the opportunity to do so. And we'd love it if any of you that do encryption within your environments, particularly on Windows, could test that functionality with these new versions. By the way, the online documentation has been updated. When you go to the documentation page, it will still currently default to the mainstream version 11 documentation. But you will, if you look towards the top of the browser, you'll see a drop down that allows you to switch to the version 12 documentation instead. As for the time frame for the 12.1 LTS release, that will largely depend on whether customers find any issues with the current 12.0 feature releases. But we're not expecting too many issues, to be honest. We currently expect to push the LTS release out of the door in probably the early April timeframe. As with the LTS release approaching fast, it's now time for us to start reviewing and updating our plans for Synergy over the next 2, 3, 4 years and so on. And for that, we'd really love to hear any feedback that you have, any ideas for the products that would help you achieve your goals. In particular, we know that the C word comes up in almost all customer conversations these days. So we will be focusing on what tools and technologies that we can develop potentially to help with your cloud deployments. But if you do have any ideas or plans in that particular area, we'd really like to have those conversations. So hit us up if you're as you go through your cloud planning strategy, involve us in those conversations if you can, and we'd love to do whatever we can to help out. Very briefly, Marty was going to present an SDI update, but he's as Liz mentioned, he's not been able to join us this morning. So I'll just very briefly tell you that we've done 2 SDI releases so far this year. If you're not aware, there is a new version numbering scheme on SDI. It's now a year.month.build number. So the current release is 2022-02. 1048. That was released just last week. Most of the time, SDI is on a different release cadence now, so it will not necessarily be released at the same time as Synergy DE. On this occasion, it was because there was a specific dependency between the two. But generally, that's not the case. So, watch out for those. We always announce our releases of all our products on the blog. So again, a recommendation there to go sign up for the blog notifications if you want to know about releases. The release we did in January was pretty much a quality improvement release. Excuse me. Every release is a quality improvement release, but also in the release we've just done, the 1048 release that we did last week, there is one specific new feature. That is a new project type I believe it's called Synergy Script. And it is basically a project template that allows you to create a project that you can add your UI Toolkit window script files into, and it will help you with the process of compiling those window scripts into a window library, which was something that Workbench had a project to deal with, and it was one of the most popular requests on the ideas forum. I think there were lots and lots of votes for that particular one, so we were pleased to be able to introduce that. I'd like to just thank 3 of our UI Toolkit customers. I'm not going to name them, but they know who they are. They helped us in the design process for that feature and make sure we got it right and appropriate. And several of their suggestions were things we hadn't thought of and things we did take into account. So I just want to thank those 3 customers very much for their involvement, both in the planning process and for helping us test those features before they went out. Also in SDI, this release also has various quality improvements. In particular, we've been doing some more work in the IntelliSense area recently. I'm not going to go into details about exactly what did and didn't change, but we very frequently chip away at IntelliSense and try and make sure it's working properly and offering the right information in all cases. And we did some of that work in this release also. As always, generally, we've had runtime version targeting for quite a long time now. So generally, we recommend the latest and greatest version of SDI, the Visual Studio tools for all developers. And keep up to date, use the latest version all the time, and target back to those older runtime versions for deployment if you need to do so. Do I have anything else to say on that? I guess I should mention, you probably, again, if you're using Visual Studio, you probably already know, but we do generally support the current version and the previous version. So we did drop support for Visual Studio 2017 back in, I think it was October, November, when we first added support for 2022. At this point, I think most people are probably using 2019 still, but more and more people every day seem to be making the switch to 2022, which after a bit of a bumpy start from both Microsoft and us, I think is now in pretty good shape. It's in really great shape. In fact, so much that I uninstalled all of my 2019 versions several weeks ago at this point, and I use 2022 pretty much exclusively and really enjoy the extra performance that the fact that it's a 64-bit app and has access to much more memory than it ever did, which seriously constrained performance in the past. So if you haven't tried 2022 yet, I'd recommend it. I think that's all I have. If there are, I guess we'll ask if there are any questions on anything we just said, or on anything else. The whole point of the Tech Talks webinars is we're here to answer whatever your questions are on anything. So have at it.
Yeah, that was thank you so much for that overview, Steve. That was great. I've also linked to the 2 blog posts about our recent releases in case you want to just hop over to those immediately. Don't see anything in the chat or Q&A quite yet. So I'll dive into a couple quick updates from education. And this first one will wind up being a plug for the Resource Center and Knowledge Base and our YouTube channel. Basically, we have a new video out there let me post a link here, on our YouTube channel for Knowledge Base in the Resource Center. And for those, I'm sure a fair few of you have visited Knowledge Base already, but it's this really, really extensive collection of tips, of suggestions, of just calling all of this knowledge that we've collected over decades. I actually went to Knowledge Base recently and sorted to see what the earliest article was, and I think it was 1996. So, this information goes back quite a bit and is updated. It had been posted in 1996, and the last update was 2020. So it's stuff that we have decades of experience on, and we're just kind of always updating that information. The sort features are really great. The search features are really great. So basically, this video just kind of walks you through how you can leverage all of those to find some really useful information. And it's just available to you. You don't have to necessarily log into the Resource Center, but if you don't have a Resource Center account already, it's a good idea to have one of those. And in general, we have a playlist also on our YouTube channel that is just Resource Center related videos. I mean, there's so much in there. There are videos for license admins, for that download section that Steve referenced. And we're constantly updating those videos as we update the Resource Center. So just a couple things to check out there. And then this was mentioned in the previous Synergy Tech Talks, but we are currently launching the Synergy DBL Essentials online course. And again, this is the web-based, self-paced version of the week-long in-person class that we used to teach for new Synergy developers. And since we really are at the launch point, I thought I would just kind of demo what a typical module will look like in this course. So I'm going to switch, if I can, we're going to switch over to a screen share here. So you should be able to see my screen. And what you're looking at here is basically the overview of each module. This particular course has 7. Future offerings may not be that extensive, but at the beginning of each module, we try and go over each learning objective that participants will run into. And then over here, there's the menu of, I guess, assets that participants will go through. So we have videos available. I'll switch to a video and pause it before it starts. Hopefully, there we go. We also have what we call cheat sheets, which are basically PDFs that have, syntax examples for participants. This is module 1, so it's very basic. And basically every module has at least 1 or 2 coding activities. So participants will get to this coding activity page. They'll download their instructions. They have little refresher slides that they can refer to, and then they can email our developer support team if they run into any roadblocks. And in this course in particular, the coding exercises start out very accessible, but they do get challenging as time goes on. And then at the end of each module, there's typically kind of a knowledge checkpoint, your typical multiple choice questions. So I'm sharing this course with everyone now, and it's not probably applicable to this particular audience, but what we'll be doing kind of as we're launching the course is collecting feedback on, okay, what else could we use this platform for? Because we could use this very same structure for, something a little more in-depth on Harmony Core, something pertaining to Visual Studio. And again, it doesn't have to be 7 modules. It could be, maybe an hour hours length of content. So just that quick demo from me. And again, we'll be hosting a webinar on this course specifically in the future, and again, collecting your feedback. So that is the education update for now. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Yeah, the knowledge base articles couldn't be much older than 1996, because I believe that's the first time we had a website.
Yeah, and other firms have, especially other tech firms have knowledge base, have a knowledge base, but I don't think any of we're a rarity in that we have articles dating back to 1996. So that's fascinating.